The afternoon Marin Whitlock caught me staring from my yard. I had my hand wrapped around a rusted toy airplane that had belonged to my son, and for one terrifying second I thought the whole neighborhood was about to learn the truth I had spent 11 years trying to bury. She stood beside her sunlit back window with flour on her cheek, her gray-blue eyes fixed on me over the fence, and instead of yelling, instead of calling me a creep, instead of closing the curtains, she opened the back door and said, "If you want to see, just ask." Before I tell you what happened next, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, because sometimes the smallest moment of compassion can pull a broken life back from the edge. My name is Everett Hale, and by the time Marin moved into the pale yellow house next door, I had become the kind of man people waved at but never really knew. I kept my grass trimmed, paid my bills on time, nodded to neighbors at the mailbox, and returned garbage bins when the wind knocked them over. But inside my house, the rooms stayed too quiet. My wife, Laurel, had left years earlier after grief turned us into strangers, and my only son, Rowan, had been gone since he was 8. I never told people the full story. I let them assume illness, accident, tragedy, anything simple enough to keep them from asking questions. The truth was harder. Rowan had run into the street chasing a little red airplane I had promised to fix, and although I was only inside for a moment answering a work call, that moment became the rest of my life. Every morning after breakfast, when the sun hit the kitchen floor, I saw the same empty doorway and heard Laurel's voice from the hospital hallway telling me she could not forgive me because she could not forgive herself either. Marin arrived on a bright Thursday with a rented moving truck, 2 chipped planters, and a little girl with chestnut curls who carried a stuffed rabbit by one ear. The girl's name was Clover, and she had the careful, watchful face of a child who had learned too early that adults could break promises. Marin was probably in her late 30s, graceful in a tired way, with hair the color of dark honey and a smile that seemed to appear only after asking permission from her sorrow. I watched from my porch as she struggled with a bookshelf, and I almost walked over to help, but something stopped me. I had spent so long keeping distance from people that kindness felt like trespassing. So I stayed there, pretending to water a fern that had been dead since spring, while Clover dropped a box of picture frames and began crying. Marin knelt in the driveway, gathered the broken glass with her bare hands, and whispered something that made the child lean into her shoulder. That was the first time I wondered what kind of pain had followed them to our street. Over the next few weeks, I learned small things without meaning to. Marin worked from home as a children's illustrator. Clover loved sidewalk chalk, waffles, and asking questions about birds. Their house smelled like cinnamon on Saturday mornings because Marin opened the windows when she baked. A silver sedan sometimes slowed in front of their driveway but never stopped, and whenever it passed, Marin's shoulders tightened. I told myself none of it was my business. Then one afternoon, while repairing a loose board in my fence, I heard Clover laughing from Marin's kitchen. It was the pure, unguarded laugh of a child who had forgotten to be afraid, and it hit me so suddenly that I dropped my hammer. Through the narrow gap in the fence, I saw her standing on a chair at the counter, pressing cookie cutters into dough while Marin guided her hands. On the windowsill behind them was a little red wooden airplane, freshly painted, almost identical to Rowan's. My breath left my chest. For a moment, I was not in my yard anymore. I was 11 years younger, holding a broken wing, promising my son I would fix it after one quick phone call. After that, I found reasons to be outside around the same time each day. I hated myself for it. I was not watching Marin the way gossip would have made it sound. I was looking for that airplane, for the impossible little echo of a boy I could never hold again. Sometimes I saw Clover carry it around the kitchen, making it soar between jars and flower pots. Sometimes Marin placed it carefully on the sill, as if it mattered too. I told myself I would stop, but grief is a strange hunger. It does not always want comfort, sometimes it wants proof that something you lost still exists somewhere in the world. And then came the afternoon Marin caught me. I was standing near the fence, the old rusted toy from my garage in my palm, staring at her window so hard that I did not notice she had turned around. Her face changed first with surprise, then caution, then something softer that made me feel worse than anger would have. She opened the back door and stepped into the sunlight. "If you want to see, just ask," she said, and I felt shame rise up my throat like fire. I started apologizing before she reached the fence. I told her I had not meant to frighten her, that I knew how it looked, that I would stay away from now on. My words came out broken and clumsy, and Clover peeked from behind Marin's skirt with the red airplane clutched to her chest. Marin looked at the toy in my hand, then at the one in Clover's arms, and something passed across her face. She did not ask the question directly. She only said, "That one looks loved." I could have lied. I could have walked back into my house and locked the door on the only honest conversation I had been offered in years. Instead, I opened my hand and showed her Rowan's airplane, chipped, faded, one wing still crooked from the day I never fixed it. I told her my son had owned one just like hers. I told her his name. I told her he was gone. The yard became silent except for a lawn mower humming somewhere down the block. Clover stepped forward and whispered that her airplane had belonged to her dad, and Marin closed her eyes as if the child had touched a bruise. That was how I learned that Marin's husband, Alden, had died 18 months earlier, not from illness or accident, but from despair after losing his job, his confidence, and finally his belief that his family would be better with him in it. Marin did not say it in a dramatic way. She said it like someone placing a glass object on a table, careful not to shatter it further. Clover did not know all the details, only that her father had gone away and left behind the red airplane he had carved for her before everything changed. Marin said she moved because the old house had too many memories and too many neighbors who lowered their voices when she passed. I listened with my hands shaking, because for the first time in years, someone else's grief did not make me run. It made me stay. Before we parted, Clover held her airplane up to the fence and said maybe Rowan and her dad had the same kind of sky now. I had no answer, so I only nodded, and for the first time since the funeral, I cried in front of another person without turning away. After that day, a fragile friendship grew between our 2 yards. It began with practical things. I fixed Marin's loose gate. She left a plate of lemon bars on my porch. Clover asked if I knew how to build a birdhouse, and I told her I had once been decent with tools. On sunny mornings, she would carry scraps of wood across the driveway while Marin watched from the porch with coffee in both hands, one cup for her and one she eventually started offering me. We never rushed the closeness. People like us did not trust happiness when it arrived too quickly. Still, the fence stopped feeling like a border and started feeling like something we leaned on while talking. Marin told me she missed the sound of adult conversation. I told her I had forgotten how to enter a room without expecting silence. Clover told me I looked sad even when I smiled, and then apologized with the brutal sweetness of a child. I told her she was right, but healing is never a straight road, and the first turning point came on a bright Sunday when the silver sedan finally stopped in front of Marin's house. A tall man in a pressed shirt stepped out, carrying flowers that looked expensive and insincere. His name was Victor Langley, Alden's older brother. I was pulling weeds near my porch when I heard his voice rise through the open windows. He said Marin was making herself look unstable by living alone. He said Clover needed stronger family guidance. He said people were talking about the older man next door spending too much time around them. I froze, every old shame in me waking at once. Marin's voice stayed low, but Clover began crying. I crossed the lawn before I could talk myself out of it and knocked on the open doorframe. Victor turned with a smile sharp enough to cut paper and asked if I was the neighborhood charity case or the replacement husband. Marin's face went pale. For a moment, I was that man again, the one who had failed his son, the one who believed he had no right to defend anyone. Then Clover ran to me with the red airplane pressed against her chest and hid behind my leg. That small act changed something. I looked at Victor and told him he needed to leave. He laughed, but Marin stood beside me and said it too, her voice shaking but clear. When he threatened lawyers and custody petitions, Marin did not collapse the way he expected. She said she had records, letters, witnesses, and a life he no longer had permission to control. Victor left in anger, crushing the flowers under his own shoe as he backed down the walkway. Afterward, Maren sat on the porch steps with her hands over her face, ashamed that Clover had seen it. I told her children did not need perfect parents, they needed brave ones who came back after fear knocked them down. She looked at me then and said maybe I should say that to myself someday. It landed so deeply that I had to look away. The past returned again a week later, this time wearing Laurel's face. I had not seen my ex-wife in 4 years. She appeared on my porch just before noon, holding a small envelope and looking thinner than I remembered, not physically, but spiritually, as if grief had carved quiet tunnels through her. Maren was in her yard painting a bench with Clover, and when Laurel saw them, her expression hardened with the old familiar pain. She said she had heard from a former neighbor that I was playing family with someone else. The word struck me because a part of me had feared the same thing. I invited her inside, but she refused. She handed me the envelope and said she had found Rowan's last drawing in a storage box, and I should have it because she could not keep being angry at paper. Her voice broke on the last word. Inside the envelope was a crayon picture of 3 stick figures beside a red airplane, the sun huge and yellow above them. Under it, in crooked letters, Rowan had written that Saturday was for flying, that I stood there in daylight with my son's drawing in my hands, and all the years between Laurel and me seemed suddenly exhausted. I told her I was sorry. Not the thin sorry I had said at court dates, therapy offices, and hospital anniversaries, but the real one, the one with no defense attached. I told her I should have put the phone down. I told her I had hated myself enough for both of us, and it had not brought him back. Laurel cried then, not loudly, just with a tired surrender that made Maren quietly take Clover inside to give us privacy. Laurel said she had blamed me because blaming me felt easier than accepting that life could turn cruel in one careless second. I said I had let her blame me because punishment felt easier than living. We did not become husband and wife again that day. Some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt for crossing. But we forgave each other enough to stop standing on opposite banks, shouting into the wind. Maren found me later in the yard, sitting beside the fence with Rowan's drawing across my knees. She did not ask too many questions. She only sat on her side of the grass, close enough that our shoulders almost touched through the gap. Clover came out carrying both airplanes, hers bright and polished, mine old and wounded. She asked if broken wings could still fly if someone fixed them carefully. I looked at Maren, and she looked back with tears in her eyes. We spent the next afternoon at the workbench in my garage with the door wide open to the sun. Clover sanded too hard and sneezed through the sawdust. Maren painted the wing with a steadier hand than mine. I replaced the cracked piece of wood I had avoided touching for 11 years. When we finished, Rowan's airplane did not look new. It still had marks, still carried history, still showed where it had been damaged. But the wing held. Clover placed both airplanes on the windowsill, side by side, and said they looked like friends. Near the end of that summer, our neighborhood held a daytime block picnic in the little park beyond our street. Maren almost did not go because she hated being watched, and I almost stayed home because crowds made me feel like an exposed nerve. But Clover insisted, and sometimes hope arrives wearing a child's stubbornness. We went together, not as a perfect new family, not as people pretending the past had disappeared, but as 3 souls learning how to stand in sunlight without flinching. Laurel came too, after I invited her. She brought a small kite shaped like a red plane and handed it to Clover with a trembling smile. Maren thanked her, and there was no jealousy in it, only grace. As Clover ran across the grass with the kite lifting behind her, I felt something inside me loosen. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that makes forgiveness feel possible. Laurel stood on one side of me, Maren on the other, and for once Rowan's memory did not arrive like a wound. It arrived like warmth. Before this story ends, leave a meaningful comment about someone you wish you could forgive, someone you hope forgives you, or a moment when kindness helped you breathe again. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Months later, Marin told me that when she caught me looking from the yard, she had nearly called the police. Then she saw the broken airplane in my hand and recognized the expression of someone not looking for trouble, but looking for a piece of himself he thought was gone forever. I told her that when she said, "If you want to see, just ask," she had not merely opened a door, she had given me permission to stop hiding from my own grief. We never rushed what grew between us. It began with coffee, fences, birdhouses, and quiet afternoons. It became trust. Then friendship. Then something tender enough to scare us both and steady enough to survive the fear. On the anniversary of Rowan's passing, Marin and Clover came with me to the small hill behind the cemetery where the sun always touched the grass first. Laurel met us there. We placed the repaired airplane beside the stone for a while, and Clover read a note she had written about two pilots in the same sky. I cried, but I did not break. That was the miracle. Not that sadness ended, but that it no longer had to sit alone. By the following spring, the gap in the fence had been repaired, but we built a little gate between our yards. Clover painted it yellow and wrote the word welcome in uneven letters across the top. Every morning, sunlight moved through that gate and stretched across both lawns like a promise. I still missed my son. Marin still missed Alden. Laurel still carried her own private ache. None of us were magically healed, and that made the ending more honest. We were simply learning that love after loss is not betrayal. It is proof that the heart, even cracked and weathered, still knows how to open. And whenever Clover ran through that yellow gate with the two red airplanes in her hands, laughing as if the whole sky belonged to her, I understood something I wish I had known years earlier: forgiveness does not erase what happened, but it gives the living permission to live. Sometimes the person who catches you at your weakest is not there to shame you. Sometimes they are there to gently say, "If you want to see hope again, just ask."